Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so first of all, the shutdown or day of action or strike in quotation marks that happened yesterday on Friday, January 30th was a success. It was a huge turnout in many cities. Was this a nationwide full economic shutdown? No, but I do think there was more economic pressure applied this time than in previous instances of no kings or something like that. And the economic pressure is the important part. So people not only willing to show up and show this type of solidarity, but doing it on a weekday, willing to forego going to work, willing to shut down their shop, willing to do anything that they can to interrupt business as usual, even if it's not in as coordinated or spectacular fashion as a real general strike would be, is genuinely powerful and still important. And I think in the coming days, over this weekend and the beginning of next week, we'll see how much of a ripple effect it made. I suspect it will have made some, because the first day of action that happened just in Minneapolis was pretty effective. And while I wish that the momentum could have built a little bit more around this day of action, and I do think that there's more organization and planning that needs to go into that, I think this was a positive step, and I predict that we will continue to see motion from the administration and dominoes falling in terms of consequences over these killings in Minneapolis, and maybe even some policy change, as well as whatever's going to happen with Democrats and this shutdown fight that's going to happen over the next few weeks. I think we are going to continue to see pressure because of the economic aspect of this protest. And that being said, if you weren't able to participate yesterday, or even if you were, there's more protests today that are a little bit less economically focused because it is on a weekend, but it's still good to show up. So if you want to make your voice heard and you want to add to this pressure to get ICE out of these cities and make a serious change to this policy, then get out in the streets today and let's keep the pressure going. So anyway, Adam Mockler did an appearance on Abby Phillips' CNN show. It's not unusual for him. He goes on shows like that. He seems to be well liked in the CNN network. If you don't know, Adam Mockler is one of the younger guys in the sort of liberal YouTube space, kind of adjacent to the Democratic Party. He was not one of the influencers that was paid by the chorus dark money thing with Brian Tyler Cohen, but he does work with people like that. He works in that sort of orbit, and he's a pretty big YouTuber. He pops up. I think YouTubers like this are popular with older audiences, and they have a lot of reach. They get into these mainstream news spaces and reach large audiences that way, and so they sort of share an audience, as well as probably outperforming most of the content that comes out of mainstream centrist outlets like CNN. So I just think we'll see probably more of this guy as time goes on. And here they're just talking about Epstein. They talk a little bit about Alex Preddy and Renee Good, as well as Don Lemon being arrested. So let me play these clips for you, and then we'll get into some more details about everything that's going on.
This is not okay, because if we don't draw that line, then we're essentially giving up on democracy. The only way a democracy functions is with a free press. Without a free press, what do we have?
But it's okay for him to cheer on.
I didn't think he was cheering on. That's your opinion. I did not believe
the question too is, you know, you're not allowed to go into private property, even if you're a journalist. Was this church private property?
Well, that would be, I mean, if he trespassed, that's a state level trespass. It's not a federal civil rights case.
And he would be charged with that, but I believe that's not among the charges.
That's not one of the charges. Very quickly, and then we got.
One of the judge's main problems was that the DOJ was kind of lumping together the actions of all the conspirators with Don Lemon, the leader. So what you did was the same thing. You're trying to lump together what Don Lemon did with the person who is leading the charge. I think this really exposes the priorities of the DOJ when they're more focused on Don Lemon and his producer than the guy who murdered Alex Preddy and Renee Nicole Good, the multiple people who murdered them. I think all of Donald Trump's actions over the past year have been an attempt to erode democracy, and he's becoming increasingly desperate as we head into the midterm. So the attacks on the press are attacks to make sure there's not transparency. Attacks on college campuses or colleges, it's to make sure that critical thinking students aren't coming out of these colleges to debunk the administration. He attacks law firms, he attacks any single check, and this is a perfect example of him trying to push a chilling effect within independent journalism. So Don Lemon is an independent journalist. I think independent journalism is incredibly important, and it's the one variable this administration hasn't really gone after super hard. So now he's targeting not only Don Lemon, but multiple other people in order to create this overall chilling effect which erodes democracy. The same administration that called Renee Good a domestic terrorist hours after her death, the same administration that called Alex Preddy a quote-unquote assassin like an hour after he was executed on the street, now wants us to trust their investigation on this. Do you agree with Kristi Noem's characterization that she made like an hour after Alex Preddy was murdered? That
Can you just wait until the investigation is done
that's
instead
what
of
wait,
prejudging?
that is such a good point. Can you say that to Kristi Noem? Kristi Noem, can you wait until the investigation is done? I'm going to ask one more time. When Kristi Noem said he was a domestic
I'm
terrorist,
not here
was
to
she
be
wrong?
interrogated by you, Adam. I'm saying wait until
So
the
you have no
investigation
answer.
is done.
So you have
but,
no answer.
but you prejudge everything that this administration does.
I mean,
Have you ever been wrong about the administration?
I'm sure I have, absolutely. But when
prejudge
when the video of Alex Preddy came out, and then Kristi Noem an hour later said domestic terrorist and assassin,
and they
that was
should not
prejudging.
have done that.
That is all I was asking you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so that is settled.
Congrats.
Yes.
All right. He has attacked the release of the Epstein files multiple times, even after he signed the bill allowing these files to be released.
There you go. He signed the bill. He's
After-
clearly on
But it
board
felt
with
like
it.
he was pressured into this. There was
Okay,
He
if he was
absolutely
in it, he
was
would not have
pressured. He was at
campaigned.
his
He
right.
would not have
Yeah.
campaigned and used that.
He
as
barely
literally a
campaigned on it, but then he
flagship of
threw
his-
any
of-
Republican that was trying to vote for the Epstein files or vote in favor of it, he threw under the bus, so much so that Marjorie Taylor Greene ended up resigning from Congress because she was getting death threats that were pointed at her from Trump supporters. Now, when we look at these files,
that's not why she resigned.
I mean, when we looked at these files,
She resigned because she has no influence or had no influence in the building.
I mean, she cited
aside.
emails that she got threatening her son's life using the
I
words
love that
Marjorie
you now
Taylor
find
Greene.
Marjorie Taylor Greene to be a
I would also
credible
say,
person.
okay, put Marjorie Taylor Greene aside for a second.
Yeah, so they didn't have Scott Jennings on this time. Instead, they have this guy, Pete Seat, who was a press secretary for George Bush. And I'm noticing a pattern here because that's also Scott Jennings' political history, is that he worked inside the Bush administration. So must be some pretty deep ties there with that former administration and CNN these days. And it's funny because normally they might present Republicans like that as like reasonable old guard Republicans who are against this new MAGA insanity. But no, both of these guys just follow along with the MAGA narrative, hook, line, and sinker. So obviously there's the moment where Mockler gets him to concede to say that he thinks Kristi Noem shouldn't have said what she said about Alex Preddy and that was a bad position to take, made things worse. All of the Republicans are conceding on that at this point. It seems to be the main sticking point that is actually cutting against the administration and making this such a problem for them, where they're not able to just wiggle away from it because all the other facts aside, even the guy being killed, being disarmed first, the nature of this ICE intervention in these neighborhoods in the first place, all that stuff aside, the main thing that these guys seem to be upset about is that Kristi Noem came out and said this guy was a domestic terrorist. Same with Stephen Miller. And the reason they're upset about that is because it makes things more complicated. That's such an obvious lie. They so obviously got it wrong, and nobody buys it. Even people on their own side don't buy that. So when someone in the Trump administration jumps the shark so hard that even the MAGA people don't believe what you say, even though it's convenient for them to believe what you say, that's when you have a problem, because we know that those people will jump through hoops and twist themselves into pretzels to believe anything that the Trump administration says. Now, I think Kristi Noem is not the one who should be getting talked about here, because it's probably too easy of a concession for them. She's now the one whose head is on the chopping block. Is she going to get fired? Is she not? She probably will at some point. But that's kind of the point of all of these cronies. They're kind of just rotating heads. When the heat gets too hot, they always go. That's how Trump operates. So it's looking like that's inevitable for Kristi Noem. I think that needs to extend to Stephen Miller. I think Stephen Miller's got to go. He's obviously the one who's really behind this. Kristi Noem has passed the blame to him and made it clear that she did what she did at his direction, essentially. But the focus doesn't seem to be on him, and that's probably why she leaked that, because she's upset that she's getting all the heat when obviously everybody knows that Stephen Miller is like Trump's favorite, and so it's not unlikely at all that Kristi Noem would be answering to him, even though that's not technically his position. That's what allows him to wiggle away in a situation like this, because technically he shouldn't be in the capacity to be giving Kristi Noem orders anyway, but he is. So the thing about Mockler here, And I like Mockler. I think he's fine doing this. He fits well into this CNN, type of environment. And overall, I think this new crop of like young liberal voices is fine. I think they probably have time, and depending on how things go in America, will probably move to the left throughout their life. If they continue genuinely pushing for progressive politics, it's naturally going to push them to the left, especially as the Democratic establishment and sort of status quo, which is part and parcel of this CNN programming that we see here, as that fails to deliver any type of departure from this slide towards fascism, that tends to be the thing that radicalizes people to the left. Now, my concern with these liberal podcasters is that as people become less trustful of the narratives that they're hearing from the Trump administration, which is starting to happen, over Epstein, over this Preddy stuff, and DHS and ICE in general. That's the one issue where I never really would have thought that they would have these credibility issues with their own base, because everyone in Trump's base is on board with the immigration shit. And some of them might have a certain sense about, it's going too far and this and that. But ultimately, that's the one thing that they knew that they were getting. So the fact that he's losing the narrative on that, to me, says something. It says that he's losing credibility with his base in a time when the liberal establishment media is not constantly hounding him and them, trying to distance them from trusting that narrative. And I think that was a big part of what binded Trump to his base for all this time, is that there was constant pressure from what was viewed to be like the leftist liberal establishment to distance people from Trump and make them not believe him. And that created this like weird reverse psychology effect where it made them trust him more. So for some reason that's evaporating now. It could be that the strategy to back off of Trump a little bit on the corporate level at some of these organizations actually worked, because if they're not actively hounding him, it makes him look worse to his own base. They have less to excuse it. So that seems to be what's happening. And my concern, though, is that if those people get disillusioned with Trump, and let's not think about like the median MAGA voter, but people on the fringes, young people, people who got interested in politics, people who voted for Trump because he's kind of interesting, right? And they wanted something interesting to happen. We got that the first time in 2016, and it was a slightly different version of it in 2024. People were more disillusioned, so they knew Trump was bad, but they just wanted, on the off chance that something kind of new and outside of the establishment norm would happen. So I think that is going to continue to be the prevailing trend in American politics. And my concern with some of these guys like Mockler, Luke Beasley, and Parker, who was on the Jubilee show, I think, these guys have huge audiences. And in some cases, I think they get the rhetoric right. But as people distance themselves from MAGA, or even people on the left, or people that are oriented to the left, just in terms of their personality, as they start looking for political leaders and a movement to coalesce that they can get behind, which is starting to happen because of this ICE stuff and some of the candidates that you see on the left, the way to attract people into a movement that is going to successfully be able to wrestle power back from these fascists is not to convince people that the other side, the Democrats, were right all along and they've been tricked and they've been duped and conspiracies, yada yada. I see that from a lot of these younger guys in the liberal space, and I understand the temptation to do it because there's been a lot of misinformation about anything from COVID to immigration, and a lot of that is what drives people to the right. But the reality is, a lot of what makes people distrustful of Democrats is that oftentimes what they're talking about and what they propose is not actually ending up panning out to be something that improves their life. And so you can argue for the virtue of something like the Affordable Care Act and that Donald Trump shouldn't repeal it. But the reality is that was a compromise measure that really never went far enough and doesn't work as well as it should. And because of that, it is much more easily underminable than something like Social Security, which was a much bolder program, where even people that nominally hate Social Security because they hear about it on Fox News or whatever, they still will be furious and show up to vote against a Republican who's trying to cut it. That is an underlying truth about our society that is often underrepresented by Democrats, because they're afraid to say that my job as a politician is to institute some kind of bold change and pursue that. But ultimately, even if it's a Democrat or something in a party outside of that, although I don't know how much room there is for that in the next couple election cycles, but I think independents can run on this same basis, and people from the Green Party or outside of it can win on the basis of offering a bold, practical change that actually addresses people's concerns. And one way to do that, in relation to the Epstein stuff, is trying to cut down on law enforcement and intelligence agencies' abilities to create these like vast webs of informants and stuff like that. Because even if that isn't the entire story of Jeffrey Epstein and everything that he did, that is definitely the thing that made it so impossible, so that there's so many layers of obstruction to getting this stuff out. Aside from the fact that Donald Trump doesn't want it out, part of the thing that made Jeffrey Epstein such a complicated figure was his ties with intelligence and the ties of all this information that he had with intelligence. And so people see these things, they see these things happening. But what happens is politicians get in power, including Donald Trump, and they realize that now that they're in power, those systems of obstruction and obscuring the truth and keeping dominance over various criminal enterprises, that benefits the politicians that ultimately end up winning. So you have to support something that goes against the status quo, is what I'm saying. And I know that that's a kind of a cliche perspective at this point, but I really worry that when I see some of these back and forths with, like liberal, Republican, they're kind of volleying back and forth. I get it, but Mockler speaks very glowingly about independent media here. And I think he's right about independent media. I think independent media is the answer to all this stuff. You look at Dropsite News, that is one of the best sources that has been releasing stuff about Epstein outside of what we're getting from the files, but actually information that's tying all this stuff together and interpreting it. Ken Klippenstein is doing great work, and plenty of others. But the best type of journalistic work or commentary work is when you're doing something that couldn't be done if you were dependent on corporate funding. And the same is true for politicians. You want politicians that could not do what they were doing if they had deep ties and relationships with corporations that people don't know about. And we are starting to see an example with Zohran Mamdani of what it can look like to have a public representative who is focused on public service, focused on communicating about public service, and focused on trying to make things better every day. And so they're taking on a lot of initiatives. We'll see where some of it goes. Things are going to accumulate in different ways when it comes to Zohran. But ultimately, I think the future for a lot of these liberal podcasters like Mockler, as much promise as they show, is to, just like anybody in the Democratic space anywhere, get more bold, get more willing to take on positions that might make some of these people sitting at this CNN table uncomfortable. Because that's the secret of all this stuff, is that they're not going to like the solution to these problems either. And that's why this conversation about Alex Preddy and Renee Nicole Good is focused so much on protesters and what they should or shouldn't have said. Was he a domestic terrorist? Was he not? And we're not talking about not just ICE and what ICE is doing under Trump, but the nature of ICE. Somebody like Mockler has enough cachet, he should be able to go on CNN and say, ICE should be abolished. It was created in 2003 under George Bush and has only become a way to target people indiscriminately and without warrant since then. That's why the agency was created. It was created in the wake of 9/11, and now that is being extended to immigrants and not just people of Muslim descent. And it's not an agency we need. And that's the type of communication that I wish somebody like Mockler was doing. I fear that part of the reason he's being rewarded, both with popularity and with visibility, is because he takes positions that are not quite anti-establishment as that. And I hope that with time, some of these young guys do a little bit better, because we need those audiences, and we need those audiences to shift to a little bit more of a visionary perspective if we're going to wrestle power back from Donald Trump, because just focusing on Democratic talking points is not going to do it, I promise.
Me too close to, too much to do. The mission is too crucial. Shout it out from the rooftops until I lose vocals. Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity.